Hello, Ramesh, how are you?
Hi, Sukrant.
So, we are coming to the end of our podcast. Hello, listeners. I hope we haven't bored you to death. It's a technical topic, but it's vital to redesigning supply chains. I mean, if you don't hear what's going on around the world, what's going on with shortages, you can't build better supply chain. You can't build better local manufacturing. I think can't is a strong word, but to build more effective supply chains, you need to use cutting edge technology.
Yes,
So, Ramesh,
I think this is going to be the
uh,
most important podcast. And in this era, you cannot really ignore social media. I think social media listening, if it's not already part of your supply chain, which needs to be so.
yeah. So let me sort of highlight what is really needed when we are listening. I'll keep coming back to the same thing in circles again and again. So it's not going to be very linear, and that's probably what you've gotten used to by me by now. That's how I talk about things. But I'll start with fundamentally what is really required. We require a real-time scoring
Yeah.
of shortages, of supplies, of opportunities. We require real time scoring of sentiment pertaining to specific topics of interest. It has to be multilingual because even though we want to do things for US and Canada, it cannot be just English and French because a lot of supplies are still going to come internationally, and international events are going to have important ramifications
Yes,
in
indeed.
terms of supply chain in North America. And what is very important in listening to it is dumb analysis will not do. So implied um, things has to be taken, even implied sentiment has to be derived basically from contextual analysis of language,
Correct.
right? Refined scoring of sentiment, even refined scoring of stance, refined semantic analysis has to be done. Sometimes you have to bring in auto summarization. Sometimes somebody shares an interesting picture, you have to even do computer vision, right? So, in fact, some of it also involves uh, fortunately or unfortunately, understanding terrorist sympathizers in it, right? So you have to use nuance, ability to listen to social media, do it ethically, but do it with very large data set. You have to also understand opinions which are not necessarily terrorist or extreme, but how is not just image of a brand name, but how is image of a certain country, right? What is
Yes.
the charter? For example, you may be interested in building good supply of plastic bottles, but a good source of it may be Pakistan. So understanding stability in that country, what people are discussing right now, whether you'll be able to get supplies or not, or whether you're trying to get some certain amount of uh, ethanol related things, or let's say sugar supplied from South American countries. Understanding its stability is useful so you can manufacture large amount of ethanol for sanitizers. So understanding all these opinions, not just the terrorist chatter, normal chatter, understanding and even predicting elections. So for example, if you were planning to import something from some of the South American countries which have very strong left or right presence,
Yeah.
understanding whether the sentiment after the elections can be favorable or unfavorable for your government is also equally important part of this. Now, but let's get to what really companies currently do. So companies currently spend a lot of time on reputation management on social media. Ramesh has spent a lot of time on that. So they basically track mentions of their brands. They are looking for negative social media material against them, right? They're looking to create more and more positive social media, but they're also doing competitor analysis. So what their competitors are up to. But that said, they're also looking at product feedback and to
Yes.
improve their product. So that is their way of talking to essentially, public, essentially people on their products, and that will continue to be the case.
Yeah.
And as Ramesh has quite aptly told about influencer marketing, right? So how various influencers have become very important, and uh, companies do spend a lot of time on brand advocates. They look for people who have disproportionate number of listeners. I have been unsuccessfully trying to be an influencer for God knows how long.
Oh, we've all
So
tried.
far, I think
We've
I've been
all
able to
tried.
influence. So far, I've been able to influence Ramesh. I think, assuming he has an account on the 4 hours. I am trying. So
Come on.
so let's actually get to the technology behind it.
Right.
So here is my time to sort of even give bit of my philosophy on artificial intelligence. I've been giving a lot of TEDx talks, a lot of talks online about various kinds of AI. We've been writing a bunch of research articles, Medium posts. So I tend to not think of AI as a single IO thing, right? I mean, it's technically anyway not an input output. It has so many nodes. But when you think of machine learning, you think of just using massive amount of input in your neural network, and things change. Things become, with big data, people are interested in deep learning. And the problem with a lot of students who come to me, especially after undergraduate, even if the data doesn't justify doing deep learning, they want to apply deep learning because it is cool and sexy. So machine learning has, even fundamentally more than 100 different approaches.
Yes.
But in addition to that, I think the key is not just to think of AI as just a smart human brain. Sometimes it's smarter, and in a lot of things, it's really missing the context, right? So it's not even covered the thousandth of a journey a human brain has in some other ways. So AI should not be treated as just like, okay, here is my input and I'm going to get an output, just like you get it from a human. I mean, for a game of Go, where it beat humans hands down, that has been okay. For a game of chess, that has been okay. But if you start thinking of AI more like a carburetor, more like your car's engine. So when you're trying to put together a car, your AI may talk to another AI, and it may talk through a deterministic algorithm. So start thinking of AI as a nut, bolt, or an engine,
Yep.
right? Not necessarily your whole car at once. So that really helps because there are things AI is really good at,
Yes.
and there are things which are still going to be there for next 30, 40 years, maybe forever, and who knows how long humanity survives, given the level of crisis we keep seeing one after another. But at least we need deterministic things. So it's not just the soft computing, hard computing still has a role. So let's look at something like Sprout Social, right? So Sprout
Yeah.
Social is using a hybrid system, which combines best of both worlds. It's using rule-based machine as well as machine learning approaches, right? So
So there's been a lot of
what it does is its rule-based system is, yeah.
there's
So
been a lot
rule-based
of
system,
market excitement about Sprout, you know.
yeah.
So people in the social listening industry at least think that some of the things that Sprout says and does are the way forward. So it would be interesting to
Hmm.
listen to what you have to say on whether Sprout can really walk the talk or not. As a person who's been in the industry for 13 years and has been listening to social chatter for at least the last 10, one thing I can tell you is this is going to be one of AI's most uh, challenging applications.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, I mean, let's sort of go to the example which I was trying to bring up. So, for example, if you're looking at a rule-based learning, right?
Yeah.
So, what you can identify that if a tweet has high five, right? Uh, you can say it's positive, while it has horrible, it's negative, right? So you don't need to really train AI, and you can use a rule-based thing. Now, uh, rule-based system will struggle with a phrase the movie wasn't as horrible as I anticipated.
Right.
Horrible would be labeled negative,
Right.
anticipated will be positive, and the rule-based learning will be thrown off.
Yep.
So, a human reader, depending on how they are, if it's somebody like me who's often negative, it may be seen as okay, good, but otherwise it may be seen as marginally negative, right? Movie wasn't as horrible. Now, you can also have, machine learning approaches which are looking at sentiment analysis, and they can even find out things which you may not notice. That if a sentence ends has a word rain and ends with single exclamation point, AI may train on 10,000 such tweets and say it's usually negative. While if the tweet has rain and ends with two exclamation points, grammatically incorrect, but that's how people speak on Twitter these days, it is likely to be positive, right? Now, sentiment analysis, even for AI, gets tricky. For example, if you have a tweet like carrots are better than squash. So squash. So are you? It's positive for carrot. It's negative for squash, but it's really not really a negative statement, right? And when you say a company A is better than company B, it is a positive statement from perspective of company A, and it's a negative statement from the perspective of company B. So how do you label it, right? So utilizing a mixture of these two, and once in a while bringing in human when you're not able to sort things out through your algorithms is still needed. And I think that's we're having three-level hybrid system, combining human intelligence um, and combining artificial intelligence and combining rule-based learning is what is needed. And having a philosophy of willing to listen from multiple channels, willing to employ multiple tools, rather than being rather than operating in black and white principles, right? Learning to operate in oceans of gray is something that will give you an edge to actually eventually have a clear picture. Now,
That's a
so
very apt description for the chatter that you get in social media. Oceans of Grey is a beautiful phrase.
interesting, yeah. So um, now let's look at another thing, right? Why doing on we looked at sentiment analysis? Let's look at some other thing. For example, HubSpot AI, right?
Yeah.
Their approach is to have predictive lead scoring, content strategy, continuous optimization, sending time recommendations. So they run a very nice show, enviable show. But even if one is not getting into what their AI is doing, think of systematically breaking down what you need to do is also important, right? So it's not just whether you have one algorithm or 10 algorithms. What you need to do, identifying your problem is equally as important. So what, for example, HubSpot AI has done, it is doing predictive lead scoring. So it's telling you which lead is more likely going to pan out. And in supply chain, that's really huge. It's saving you time because at the end of the day, a human is going to negotiate, right? So it's saving you time to not call a bad lead and helping you call good lead. Now, content strategy can be equally important. So basically, if you have machine learning feature where one can create new topics automatically, right? Based on existing pages, existing blog posts, social
Yes.
media posts, that becomes really fast, right? So you don't have to necessarily just hire people all the time to write it. New content is always needed, but if you can sort of mix and match your existing content and communicate with people based on that, dynamically as things are evolving, that becomes really big. It's almost like having politicians. They regurgitate the same shit over and over again, and we still vote for them. We still
Well,
fall for them, and
they know to make it sound new and shiny.
yeah. So essentially, content strategy is like making an AI which can do the same. think of content strategy as a good bullshitter, right? So also you have to think of like continuous optimization. You can't optimize things for one thing, right? Because these things continue to change over time, right? So um, so basically, think of a scenario where you are having various life cycles, lead starters, and essentially you need to make sure that you're matching the right things, whether it's like matching the right supplier, providing the right thing to the customer. It's not a fixed thing. It's going to evolve when you need to do. And when you're giving recommendations, right? So you have to give the relevant recommendations. In this case, HubSpot does some amazing stuff. There are several other examples. I mean, one example is of people using AI very creatively is Crimson Hexagon, which is now owned by Brandwatch. Ramesh spent quite some time explaining how Brandwatch is a very important player in the market. Now,
Amazing
so all
stuff.
these things are actually playing a very important role. And off late, in addition to just the overall brand monitoring, even though nobody has explicitly gone on to supply chain, which we hope several people get onto. But there have been some who have started not just doing the brand thing, they're looking at even coronavirus prices.
Yes.
So some people are doing really good. One of them is Synthesio, right? So there is synthesio.com, which is basically looking at how the world is interacting with each other regarding the virus, right? Tracking, analyzing, reporting on social media. So it's combining AI, providing brands and agencies around the globe people's responses, right? So they can launch new brands according to how the world is changing during the COVID crisis. And it will play a phenomenal role in post COVID-19 world. So it
Uh,
continues to say what people are complaining about, what are the memes and whatnot. I hope some of my memes throw their algorithm off. So I go with the philosophy, you can never make a system idiot proof. There's always a better idiot. And I aim at that on Twitter. So if you check this out, half the time it's technical stuff like this, and other half the time it's like you know, just crying for attention by being a jackass. So that's sort of my philosophy to Twitter. But anyway, coming to sort of this, they even sort of analyze emojis and whatnot, right? So the other thing, I'll give you an example. What they're doing is a G Square. It's a web developing agency based out of Australia.
yeah.
They're 24/7 dedicated to COVID-19 social media monitoring. And their services have resulted in fourfold, 400% increase in brand mentions of existing clients. So they basically have been flowing along with the way COVID-19 situation is sort of evolving. And just like any crisis tanks a lot of existing business, there are few who emerge out of crisis. I mean, during recession, the Great Recession, there were new people who emerged during World Wars. Then the World Wars, new companies emerged. G Squared, in terms of advertising, in terms of brand management, is taking it to sort of next level. Um, but what they do, I'll give you an example. So they essentially provide three levels of service, right? So they are like flagging things which require attention, right? Hide, delete as per social media policy. So they're informing people in the context of COVID-19. Then they are basically responding based on frequently asked questions, knowledge database. Then they are basically free-form response, right? So monitor outlets basically. So they have basically trialed with some US medical groups, which operate, one group which operates more than 30 hospitals. So they are definitely working on a lot of these things. Now, Brandwatch is again, I think, getting certain things out. They have a daily email bulletin. They have weekly consumer insights, right? So they are informing the world in this whole thing that how perceptions towards COVID-19 are changing, how consumers have altered behavior, so which is relevant to supply chain, even though they are trying to consult brands, but this is very relevant. They are trying to sort of talk about how consumer mindset is changing, what are the issues on top of their mind, how the buying habits are changing, and patterns are different across geographies and sectors. So what is really nice about Brand Watch, which even Ramesh had discussed earlier, they listen to even Chinese social media. They're not just limited to Facebook, to Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. There are a bunch of Chinese social media. So they have a more global picture than others. So they also sort of explore live COVID data, right? So they have insights from more than 300 conversations happening on social media, news, etc. So, their dashboard gives you immense sort of insights. So this is what is current, and we started this conversation by saying what is sort of broadly needed. Now, one of the components I would sort of like to get to of what is needed is essentially fake news detection, right? Because what will happen now, what is already happening and what will happen in future is there's going to be a lot of fake news. And what goes in understanding fake news also goes in understanding correct news, right? So one of them is stance detection, second is semantic analysis, and third is sentiment analysis. And if you forget it by end of the podcast, it's not a big deal. We're just trying to sort of tell you how basically you go about it. Now, one of the main key things, right, of stance detection is that you look at categories whether the title of the news does it really match what is being said in the news, right? So it's basically comparing the headline with the body of the text, right? So that's not really rocket science. You do it in 2 seconds, right? People send you a clickbait article and the substance of the article is something else. Now imagine all those clickbait articles went away or went away for understanding supply chain, right?
Right.
So from perspective of people analyzing things or algorithms are analyzing things, stance detection gets rid of noise. So stance detection fundamentally is looking at your target headline and what is written in the body, right? Is the target in the favor of the text, target not in favor of text, target discusses text, or target is unrelated to the text. So, it goes about it in that manner. Then semantic analysis is basically very interesting because, you know, uh, in addition to comparing it with some authentic sources, what you can do, right? So there are various indicators you can find between news and personal experiences. When people write fake traveling article, right? They're not familiar with the place. They'll ignore facts.
Yep.
Okay, they will tend to make up things, and it's surprising that people don't. By reading fake news, they are not able to diagnose. Kids somehow are better than elderly, right? Elderly have a worldview; they're very prone to, sort of going
Confirmation
along with
bias.
fake news.
Much of
Yeah,
it operates on
uh,
confirmation bias, right? So,
yeah, exactly. So confirmation bias, and kids have less of that to sort of go with. They're still having an open mind about things.
yes.
So,
And so
uh,
does AI.
what you can, that doesn't say they're nice. Kids are still assholes. It's just that they're having.
No, I was just saying AI also, as long as you do not accidentally introduce confirmation bias into your AI, it should also not be easily fooled by fake news.
Hmm. So you have an article, let's say you review an article, then you do semantic analysis, and then you have article on similar topics, right? Then you compare these articles with the article in question, and you can see whether the article is correct or not.
Yes.
So following the initial semantic analysis, you have to sort of go through this, that there are two level things, right? Now, last but not least, there is sentiment analysis, which we discussed quite a lot about. Is it positive? Is it negative? Right? So you
Yes.
can have things which is basically looking at vocabulary. Then it's looking sort of um, at nuances. It's looking at context, and that's where we discussed whether the thing is just hard computing, whether it's soft computing, and I'll again emphasize it has to be a combination of hard computing, soft computing, and human intelligence, right? So still having centers of people who can analyze news will be useful. Um, and so now coming to sort of the end of the conversation, what does supply chain require, right? What are the challenges of supply chain? Some of the challenges are quality customer service. You have to lower the logistical costs, right? So customer service will involve taking their feedback, providing the right stuff, brand management, and all the current social media listening approaches already in practice, modifying them for this perspective, more of a macro perspective rather than one brand focused, right? So instead of being a brand focused, it'll be brands focused. So, but it's also about providing things on time. So understanding where there are delays, right? Listening to climate news, listening to specifically weather news more than climate news, right? So what is going to happen over a period of 15, 20 days, that is relevant. What is going to happen tomorrow is even more relevant. But when you're
Yeah.
shipping, let's say something from Eastern African country to Toronto, it's going to take a 20-day shipping time. It becomes pretty relevant to take a 20-day estimate on what's going to happen. Are there going to be storms in the middle? So
Yeah.
quality customer service requires various things, right? Then there are high logistical costs, understanding, listening to people about the costs, right? What they're quoting things at. And we have been doing that. We've been getting our feet wet. And we realize the first quote versus when you actually negotiate, push through, they are different. People across the globe are more willing to say they have something, whether they have it or not, right? So it's a lot of hard work. But so these listening tools definitely help you. Risk management is an important component there. It partly plays a role. Supplier relationship, it can play a role. If you know what your supplier likes, what they don't like, what is being said about them, right? So
Yes.
listening can really help. Um, Unforeseen delays are there. There's slightly less role, but again, I think it can still be helpful in that. There's demand forecasting. That's where it can play a really, really big role. Understanding that people are finding paucity of something. Let's say people are afraid that there might be some shortage of meat in California. You get your supplies ready from Mexico, and you help provide for a certain important thing, and also you make sure that there is no such problem, right? So in addition to demand forecasting, there is inventory planning. There, it's not as useful, and then there is optimization strategy.
Yeah.
So these are sort of the pillars. Uh, I would basically just reiterate what these things are. Quality customer service involves tracking shipment, fast and accurate delivery service, ideal inventory management is required, getting feedback from customers is required, voice of customer, as or as an industry they say VOC, high cost, cutting cost is the biggest thing, right? Finding who's providing for what, whether a particular thing is available cheaper in China or in Vietnam or in India to supply is useful, and how can we make it, let's say, cheaper in US or in Canada, will require finding even where things are being made, where people who have the right skill set, right? Or even finding who can come and uh, do the skilling of Americans or Canadians. Risk management has several components, right? So uh, they the main components are prevention, right? So safeguard installed to prevent supply chain disruption. You have to be prepared, backup plan during time of a crisis, which I
Yeah.
see in this COVID-19 expose that most companies hardly had any preparedness, right? Response and recovery. So
Yeah.
there is a component of detecting environmental risk. There's also a huge component of cybersecurity in this. And more often than not, cybersecurity has been ignored. People are still sort of, hard, tough guys involved in sort of supply chain. They're not always tech savvy. And that's
Yes.
why Amazon could, you know, push away a lot of people, because Amazon is a tech company. I mean, it's an admirable tech company, I am not trying to sort of be a PR guy for Bezos, but I'm simply saying in terms of technology, they do amazing job. Obviously, they're amazing, huge empire and business model beyond technology, but technology still is at one of the core things for them. So, but then there is supplier relationship. So in supplier relationship, you have implementation of supplier management strategy. You have risk evaluation, right? And then you have a detailed supplier relationship management. And we discussed how things can play a role.
Yes.
Then you have unforeseen delays. These unforeseen delays even can have warehouse management system issues. So there is
So
end-to-end visibility of the company, of the supply chain. There are supply chain vulnerabilities, which again can also be looked at to some extent from listening. Um, Demand forecasting, we have gone over it several times, right? And inventory planning, I think it should be obvious if whether, um, in fact, it can help us say whether we need to have few big warehouses, right? Or one needs to have a decentralized warehousing approach. So inventory planning can be done based on demands. And I think for the next century, which surely will again be an American century, how to better build good supply chain, good local manufacturing will depend on our ability to be agile rather than have a fixed plan, right? If we have a fixed plan that we are going to rely on central warehousing or we are going to rely on, more decentralized approaches, that's wrong. So one has to be able to move really fast. Then it's about optimizing supply chain structures and interfaces. That's like a whole field in itself. But again, a lot of these listening tools can play an important role. Lastly, to sort of conclude this conversation, what I would sort of like to get to is, look, listening is not the beginning and end of every thing to do in supply chain. You have to find the right manufacturers. You find right manufacturers locally. You have to find right manufacturers in friendly countries. You also have to find the right talent to make things. In addition to right manufacturers, right talent, you also need uh, the ability to have all the instruments, right? So putting local manufacturing will require a phased process. It is going to be a
yes,
somewhat less globalized world. There is going to be systematic deglobalization, but while it happens incrementally, it is not going to happen in one go. For example, America, USA relies so heavily on China for a lot of their active pharmaceutical ingredients. So
yes,
antibiotics primarily are coming from China. So
yes,
it's not that we can say tomorrow, let's stop bringing in antibiotics from China completely. That'll be stupid. I mean,
yep.
unless somebody is at war with China, even if there was a limited war, one would hope that those supplies continue on, right? So, but what COVID-19 has made people realize that more and more things need to be made domestically. So, in a phased manner, how things will be done in an optimal way. Several technological approaches are going to play a role. Social media listening is going to be one of the important computational approaches, not the only thing.
Yes,
In fact,
absolutely.
uh, pretty soon Ramesh and I will discuss other approaches of optimally matching a manufacturer with the right buyer, right? So let's say you have a manufacturer and they can find the right customer at Walmart or Target, but sitting in a small town in Texas, they are not connected. So how can you connect them? While they are a better manufacturer, while somebody may be buying, let's say, from some other place, maybe from India or China, while there might be a better supplier available from Texas, and they may not be buying it just because they're not connected. So how can you connect? How can you optimize for it? We'll discuss all those things in future things, but I really hope that you enjoyed Ramesh and I discussing supply chain issues over a few episodes. Ramesh, do you have something to say as we end the series?
No, I think this was a fascinating discussion, and I've enjoyed all 11 episodes of the whole journey from ethics to technology to social media, taking into account how people think, how societies think. I think anyone who's been with us for all these 11 episodes is really going to consider themselves an expert on listening, I'm sure. And thank you so much for this very lucid lecture, Sukan.
Okay. Thank you and bye bye.
Bye.